There is a small bowl sitting on a nightstand, ceramic, slightly chipped at the rim, the kind you'd find in any kitchen cabinet, in any home, in any town from Portland to Savannah. Inside it, roughly 2 tablespoons of something unremarkable. Not a pharmaceutical, not a supplement in a gelatin capsule, just food. Plain, ordinary food that you could buy for less than $1 at any grocery store in this country. That bowl, and what it contains, has become the subject of quiet but serious conversation in the cardiovascular research community. Not because it represents some breakthrough molecule or a patented compound, rather because decades of accumulated nutritional and vascular data have converged on an observation so fundamental that many researchers feel almost embarrassed it took this long to articulate. What you eat, or fail to eat, in the final hours before sleep may be shaping your stroke risk in ways that your morning routine cannot compensate for. And this particular bowl? It shows up in kitchens and bedrooms across cultures that share one startling statistical trait: significantly lower rates of nocturnal stroke. That chipped ceramic dish is in millions of homes right now. Whether it is doing its job depends entirely on whether you understand why it matters. So let me walk you through the evidence, carefully, completely, and without exaggeration, because you deserve to understand what your nighttime metabolism is actually doing and how a simple food can intervene. I should tell you up front, I spent the better part of my career studying vascular physiology in highly clinical settings, laboratories, controlled trials, peer-reviewed journals with formatting requirements so rigid they could make a person weep. And for most of those years, I would have dismissed the idea that a bedtime snack could meaningfully influence stroke outcomes. I would have called it reductive. I would have been wrong. We now know, and when I say we, I mean the broader cardiovascular and nutritional science community, that the hours between roughly 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. are not a metabolic quiet zone. Your body is not simply resting. Your vascular system is undergoing a complex sequence of recalibrations. And if the raw materials for those recalibrations are absent, the system improvises. Improvisation in biology almost never ends well. Let me ground this in something tangible. Your blood pressure follows what researchers call a dipping pattern during sleep. In a healthy individual, systolic pressure drops by 10 to 20% as you move through the deeper stages of the sleep cycle. This nocturnal dip is not incidental, it is essential. Your endothelial cells, the thin, delicate lining of every blood vessel in your body, use this lower pressure window to perform maintenance. They repair microdamage. They regulate the production of nitric oxide, which is the molecule responsible for keeping your arteries supple and relaxed. They process inflammatory markers that accumulated during the waking hours. Now here is where your evening nutrition becomes acutely relevant. The production of nitric oxide does not happen in a vacuum. It requires specific precursors, amino acids, minerals, and cofactors that your body cannot manufacture on demand. If those precursors are not circulating in your blood during the overnight maintenance window, the endothelial cells cannot do their work. Damage accumulates instead of being repaired. And accumulated, unrepaired vascular damage is, to put it in economic terms, a debt. A debt that compounds. A debt that, one night, comes due. Stroke, particularly ischemic stroke, is often framed as a sudden event, a lightning bolt. But the research increasingly tells a different story. Ischemic stroke is the final transaction in a long series of metabolic overdrafts. Your vascular system has been writing checks against an account that was slowly being drained, night after night, while you assumed everything was fine because you felt fine when you woke up each morning. So what is in that bowl on the nightstand? What is the deposit that offsets the nightly withdrawal? Potassium. Not a potassium supplement. I want to be precise about that because the distinction matters clinically. A whole food source of potassium, consumed within approximately 90 minutes of sleep, accompanied by a modest amount of magnesium and natural fiber. The food that fits this profile most elegantly, most accessibly, and with the strongest epidemiological backing is the banana. Or, for those who prefer variety, a small serving of kiwi fruit, or a quarter cup of unsalted pistachios. Or, and this is the one that appears most frequently in the Mediterranean and Japanese longevity data, a few slices of avocado with a pinch of sea salt. Anyway, the reason these particular foods matter at this particular time is something I want to explain properly, because understanding the mechanism protects you from being misled by oversimplified claims. Your body manages potassium through a tightly regulated system. During the day, when you eat potassium-containing foods, your kidneys process the excess and excrete it through urine. This is routine. But during sleep, renal excretion slows dramatically. Your kidneys shift into a conservation mode, and this means that potassium consumed in the late evening remains bioavailable in your bloodstream for a substantially longer period than the same amount consumed at breakfast or lunch. Why does this matter for stroke prevention? Because potassium is the primary counterbalance to sodium in the regulation of arterial pressure. Think of potassium and sodium as two sides of a ledger. If sodium is the spending side, driving fluid retention, increasing pressure against vessel walls, promoting stiffness, then potassium is the savings side. It encourages the smooth muscle in your arterial walls to relax. It promotes the excretion of excess sodium. It supports the electrical stability of cardiac cells, reducing the likelihood of the arrhythmias that can dislodge a clot during sleep. We now know from a landmark analysis published in the Journal of the American Heart Association. I will cite this properly at the end because the data deserve to be checked, not just believed. That adults over 50 who consumed at least 3,500 milligrams of potassium daily had a stroke risk reduction of approximately 21% compared to those consuming less than 2,000 milligrams. 21%. That is not a marginal effect. And when the timing of potassium intake was examined, specifically whether a portion was consumed in the evening versus entirely during daytime meals, the association strengthened further. The evening cohort showed better nocturnal blood pressure dipping and lower morning surge readings. Morning surge. Let me pause on that term because it is critically underappreciated. When you wake up, your sympathetic nervous system fires. Cortisol spikes. Blood pressure climbs rapidly. This is called the morning surge, and it is the single most dangerous hemodynamic event of your 24-hour cycle. The majority of strokes, by a wide margin, occur between 6 a.m. and noon, with the highest concentration in the first 2 hours after waking. The morning surge is essentially a stress test your cardiovascular system undergoes every single day without your consent or awareness. If your arteries spent the night without adequate potassium to support nitric oxide production, if your endothelial cells could not complete their repair cycle, if your sodium-potassium balance was tilted towards sodium because your last meal was at 6 p.m. and contained no meaningful potassium, then the morning surge hits a system that is already compromised, a system already running a deficit. The debt comes due. Actually, let me reframe that because I do not want to make it sound fatalistic. The debt comes due only if you let it accumulate, and that is exactly the point. A modest, potassium-rich bedtime snack is not a cure. It is not a reversal of decades of vascular neglect, but it is a deposit, a nightly deposit into a system that is trying, with whatever resources you provide, to keep you alive until morning. The fascinating part is that this is not new knowledge in an absolute sense. Japanese researchers identified the nighttime potassium connection in hypertensive populations as early as the late 1990s. Mediterranean dietary patterns, which have long been associated with reduced stroke incidence, naturally include potassium-rich evening foods. Yogurt with fruit after dinner, nuts before bed. These are not medical interventions. They are cultural habits that happen to align precisely with what the vascular physiology demands. What is new is the mechanistic understanding. We can now trace the pathway from potassium in the gastrointestinal lumen to its absorption in the jejunum, to its redistribution during sleep, to its effect on the vascular smooth muscle of the middle cerebral artery, the vessel most commonly involved in ischemic stroke. The resolution of our understanding has become granular enough that dismissing dietary timing as irrelevant is no longer a defensible scientific position. But this is not black and white. And I want to be honest with you about the complexity. Not everyone needs the same amount of potassium. Individuals with chronic kidney disease, for example, may need to restrict potassium intake. And for them, a high potassium bedtime snack could be harmful rather than protective. If your kidneys are not functioning at full capacity, potassium can accumulate to dangerous levels, affecting cardiac rhythm. This is why I am not prescribing a universal protocol. You need to know your own kidney function. Ask for a basic metabolic panel if you have not had one in the last year. Know your GFR, your glomerular filtration rate. That number tells you whether your kidneys can handle the potassium you are asking them to manage. For the majority of adults over 50 with normal renal function, however, the evidence is persuasive. A bedtime snack containing between 300 and 450 milligrams of potassium, one medium banana provides roughly 422 milligrams, consumed with a small amount of healthy fat to slow absorption and extend bioavailability, appears to support the overnight vascular maintenance cycle in a measurable and meaningful way. Now let me give you the practical architecture of this, because theory without application is just academic vanity. Your evening meal probably ends between 6 and 7 p.m. for most of you. By 10 or 11 p.m., the potassium from that meal has already been substantially processed. Your blood levels are declining. Your body is entering the overnight conservation phase. And if nothing arrives to replenish the supply, the endothelial maintenance window opens to find the shelves bare. So between 30 and 90 minutes before you plan to fall asleep, eat one of the following. A medium banana, the simplest option, and there is no reason to overthink simplicity. 2 kiwi fruit, which also provides serotonin precursors that independently support sleep quality. A quarter cup of unsalted pistachios, which add magnesium and healthy fats. A small avocado half with a pinch of mineral-rich salt. Salt, yes, because a small amount of sodium actually enhances potassium uptake through a co-transport mechanism in the intestinal wall. Or a 6-ounce serving of plain yogurt with a handful of dried apricots. This combines potassium, magnesium, calcium, and probiotics. The fat component matters. If you eat a banana alone on an empty stomach, the potassium is absorbed rapidly, peaks early, and may be partially excreted before the critical 2 to 5 a.m. maintenance window. Pair it with a tablespoon of almond butter or a few walnuts, and the absorption curve flattens. The potassium enters your bloodstream more gradually and remains available for a longer stretch of the overnight period. This is not fringe nutritional science. This is basic pharmacokinetics applied to food. I also want to address magnesium specifically because its role in this equation is underappreciated. Magnesium is a cofactor in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the human body, and several of those reactions directly support nitric oxide synthesis and vascular relaxation. Potassium and magnesium are not competitors. They are collaborators. Think of them as, if I may borrow from the garden, the soil and the water. You cannot grow anything with only one. The nighttime snack that contains both potassium and magnesium is substantially more effective than one containing either alone. Pistachios, avocado, and yogurt with dried fruit all deliver both. There is something else happening during sleep that connects directly to this conversation, and it involves your platelets. Your blood platelets, the tiny cell fragments responsible for clotting, undergo a phenomenon called morning hyperaggregability. In the early morning hours, platelets become stickier, more prone to clumping, more likely to form the kind of clot that can lodge in a narrowed cerebral artery and trigger an ischemic stroke. Adequate overnight potassium and magnesium levels have been shown in controlled studies to modulate this hyperaggregability. Not eliminate it, modulate it. Bring it within a range that your body's own fibrinolytic system can manage. You are not replacing your blood pressure medication with a banana. I want that to be unambiguous. If your cardiologist has prescribed antihypertensives, ACE inhibitors, calcium channel blockers, or antiplatelet agents, those medications are addressing immediate, identified risks that dietary intervention alone cannot match. What you are doing with a bedtime snack is supporting the biological environment in which those medications work. You are, to extend the economic metaphor one final time, increasing the balance in the account from which your body draws during its most vulnerable hours. There is a quiet irony in all of this that I find genuinely moving. We spend enormous sums on advanced cardiac imaging, interventional cardiology, clot retrieval devices, and post-stroke rehabilitation. These are all necessary and often life-saving. But the overnight metabolic vulnerability that precedes many strokes, the slow, silent depletion that sets the stage for the morning crisis, can be partially addressed with something your grandmother might have done without knowing why: a piece of fruit before bed. She was not reading the Journal of the American Heart Association. She was not aware of the nocturnal dip or the morning surge or the sodium-potassium ATPase pump that maintains electrochemical balance across every cell membrane in your vascular system. She was eating a banana because it seemed like a reasonable thing to do before sleep, and it tasted good, and she would sleep more comfortably afterward. We have spent decades learning the names for why she was right. Now, and I want to leave you with this, your body will go to sleep tonight. It will enter that long, unmonitored stretch where repairs either happen or they do not, where arterial walls either receive the raw materials for maintenance or they go without, where the ledger either balances or slips a little further into deficit. You cannot control your genetics. You cannot control the decades of dietary history that preceded this moment. But you can control what is circulating in your bloodstream at midnight tonight, and at 2 a.m., and at 4 a.m. when the maintenance crews inside your arteries show up for their shift. What will they find when they get there? Will the shelves be stocked? I do not want you to answer me. I want you to answer yourself, quietly, sometime tonight, when you are standing in the kitchen and the house is getting still, and you are deciding whether today's information was just something you watched or something you acted on. That chipped ceramic bowl on the nightstand. It is such a small thing, such an ordinary thing, and yet, if you found this information valuable, subscribe to this channel so you do not miss what comes next. And if someone you love is over 50 and sleeps through the night without knowing any of this, share this video with them, not because I asked, because they matter to you. I'm Dr. Albert Winslow. Thank you for your time tonight.